Welcome to our virtual Justice on the Block Legal Information Clinic. This clinic is part of the virtual series, Know Your Child's Education Rights. This session, we will talk about, it will be a legislative update for 2023. I am Stephanie Johnson, Senior Attorney in the Tallahassee Office of Legal Services in North Florida. And with me is Cheryl Sadler, our Educational Advocate with Legal Services in North Florida. So first, just a quick housekeeping note. This video provides legal information and should not be considered legal advice. This video does not create an attorney-client relationship or substitute for legal advice you may have already been given. You may have defenses that we haven't discussed here, so seeking out an attorney for legal help is always advisable. For more information about legal services in North Florida, you can go to our website, which is www.lsnf.org, or call 850-385-9007. Thank you for joining us today. So every year, the Florida legislature makes changes to education that impact both students and parents. We have a separate Facebook Live on the changes to school choice and mental health services, but we wanted to talk about what other big changes should students and parents know about. So Cheryl, take us away.
Oh, yes, Steph, there were a lot of bills signed and passed into law this year. I'm only going to talk about the really big ones that are likely to affect a lot of students and families. And this Facebook Live is your fault, right? Because you saw something in the newspaper and said, Cheryl, did you know that they were changing school start times? So do you want to start there?
Sure. I heard that there was a bill about changing school start times.
Oh, well, and the truth is there was a bill, but it's kind of a weird situation. There's a new requirement, yes, but it doesn't kick in for 3 years, okay? 2026, and that's 3 years to plan. We're in school year 23-24. Then we go to 24-25, 25-26. So this change would actually happen in 26-27. And there's really two things you need to think about that. First of all, there's a lot that can change in 3 years. And secondly, that's a lot of time to plan. So it's not really the time to get too worried. And here's the idea. There is a lot of research, and this is absolutely true, that adolescents need more sleep. And they also do better in school, and they attend school more regularly if school starts later. So the legislature is like, maybe we should do that. We have a problem with adolescents learning and missing school. And absenteeism is getting to be a real problem here in Florida. So middle schools, so early adolescent, would have to start no earlier than 8 o'clock in the morning, and high schools no earlier than 8:30. I don't think any kids are going to have a problem with this. This is really about parents and disrupting parent schedules. Right now, about half of Florida's high schools start before 7:30. So, and over the years, I have been very frustrated about school schedules. They're complicated. And if you ask about bus schedules, it is like, I don't know, asking in a different language. So, parents should right now look for opportunities to be part of the conversation about how this could work best for them and their kids. But there's nothing, don't lose sleep about this, haha, yet. And trust me, your kid, they're already sleeping.
Okay, so another thing that drives me insane is that kids get to use their cell phones during class. Are there any changes to the cell phone usage?
Actually, there are changes all over the country, including right here in Florida. You're absolutely right. Everyone is worried about how much time kids spend on cell phones, especially during class. And I can't imagine being a teacher and looking out at my 25 kids and having them all, down. And I can't even text with my thumbs. So I don't know. So obviously distract students from learning. And we're learning more and more that it impacts their mental health, right? It's not good to be on TikTok all day. But now teachers can designate an area for students to leave their cell phones during class. And they are not allowed, students are specifically not allowed to use their cell phones during instructional time unless a teacher says, Here, I want you to use Google to look up this, something like that, a specific instruction. There's another kind of little part to this that schools have to teach students starting in 6th grade through 12th grade about the social, emotional, and physical effects of being on social media. And this is new. When you and I were growing up, we didn't have cell phones, and certainly we didn't have social media. So the DOE is also supposed to put out materials for parents to use at home. So parents might want to be on the lookout for those, and probably local school districts will have some more of the same. This is really becoming a big problem.
Good. So what about testing? That's always the big one. I heard that Florida has changed its testing system once again.
Everyone loves testing. There are fan clubs for testing. I'm kidding. Last year, the legislature made enormous changes to testing from pre-K all the way up to high school. So this year, those of you who are parents watching and kids know that there has been an entirely new test for English and math. And also they've changed the way the tests are given. And I'm not sure which is harder, really. So instead of taking one big test at the end of the year, students are now taking 3 shorter tests throughout the year. And the test that they're taking is new. It was created to match Florida's new academic standards. And that's what tests are doing, is they're testing against the standards we hope the kids are learning. The idea about these shorter tests is, we used to call the end of the year test like an autopsy, which is a terrible analogy, but by the time you're doing an autopsy, it's too late to fix anything, right? But if you test throughout the year, then teachers should know where students are struggling and be able to help them catch up. So those new tests are called FAST, which stands for Florida Assessment of Student Thinking. I don't hear anybody running around saying, oh, it's FAST day, but just FYI. The other thing, parents, it's hard to avoid tests, but now we're testing little kids too. We used to just start in the 3rd grade. And if you ever have talked to a 3rd grade teacher, that is a huge, huge burden, because it's like all of a sudden we find out how far behind kids are and if they can then progress to the 4th grade. And now we actually are starting to test in pre-kindergarten, as well as kindergarten and 1st and 2nd grades, with the idea that's kind of the same as the short tests, right? We need to catch kids sooner, because if you need help, why would we wait 3 or 4 years to give you that help? Mm-hmm. They've also tried very hard to make sure that parents can understand test reports. So they're always changing those. There's a link in the chat to a new parent guide. And so that hopefully will help. But I want to tell you a really important thing that I know matters to you and all parents, and that is these tests actually aren't part of student grades. Okay. There are obviously consequences. So 3rd grade promotion and graduation from high school. But in between, it's not like if they get a low score on the test, they fail the class. But stay tuned, watch this space. The legislature loves this whole testing stuff. And so what I'm telling you now in December 2023 is true through this school year. Definitely, you don't want to just, believe it and forget about it.
Okay. So we may have a new acronym come next year.
We love new acronyms.
Were there any new requirements for teaching or curriculum in the legislative session?
We probably should have started with that. I mean, that's kind of the basis of school, right? And there are big changes. And the biggest change is in how reading is taught. Mm-hmm. And Steph, I know you're not an education person, but reading is not just about reading. You need to read to learn math. You need to read to learn social studies. And it's just a basic building block. And so we have had controversy for literally decades, at least my entire life, on how to teach reading. And research has become increasingly clear, which is great, that students need to learn a certain way. it's not always the way that teachers like, and it's not necessarily what teachers learned in college, which is the hard part. It's called The Science of Reading, and it has things like phonics, which is learning to sound out letters and words, and decoding, which sounds like a very fancy detective thing, but that's how to use letter combinations and patterns to figure out words we don't already know. So most adults who are good readers have these skills. The Science of Reading is how to teach kids these skills. But in case you thought you'd get off with just reading, no. There are changes in math. And this is actually, I think, a really positive thing. So there's been a lot of talk about dyslexia, which is a specific reading difficulty. Now Florida is also worried about students with math problems, and those tend to be called dyscalculia. So dys being not, and calcula, I think, is a fancy word for math. We want to make sure those kids get help. And obviously identifying the problem, it's not that they're not studying, it's not that they're not trying, it's that things look differently to these kids' brains, and so they need to be taught in a different way. Districts now have to look specifically for these kind of reading deficiencies in K-3, and then math K-4. And so part of how the new tests are being used is to look for those specific patterns in how kids answer that might say, hey, you need to take another look at this. There's something else here. The good news is that parents will actually be notified if their child might have these kind of problems, and they're supposed to get specific help. Parents can also get New Worlds scholarships, and those are $500 per student for reading or math tutoring. Schools have to keep track of student progress, and they have to send parents resources to help students at home. And we will put a link to how parents can get those New World scholarships into the chat, because, you know, it's sometimes really hard to track down that information.
Okay, so what about any changes for children with disabilities?
Well, for good or bad, there are just a few little changes, but they're important. First of all, parents of young children. So a lot of kids with disabilities go to pre-K, and then they have to make that transition to kindergarten. Sometimes they're not ready to make that transition. And so now parents can actually let 4-year-old students with disabilities stay in pre-kindergarten for another year. And that's a parent choice. So, you know, you don't have to do that, but it's out there. Kind of linked to that, when you have little kids who are in special education, they often don't have a specific diagnosis. They're too young to say they're autistic or, you know, anything else. So we usually call them developmentally delayed. They're just not meeting all the milestones of a typical child's progression. The problem has been that, again, when the child transitions into kindergarten and first grade, they used to have that specific diagnosis. And it's, you know, testing a 5-year-old is not a perfect science. Mm-hmm. So now the state has actually said, you know what, we're going to hold on to that developmental delay until age 9 or the end of 3rd grade. I think it's 3rd grade. In case we don't have that specific diagnosis. So the good news is that students continue to get the services they need while they're getting old enough to get, you know, a stable, valid diagnosis. The third thing is, and this has been changing over the last few years, is restraint. So schools can restrain students when they are a danger to themselves or a danger to others, but they can now, first of all, only be used when all other supports and interventions are exhausted. And secondly, there has to be imminent risk of serious injury. And, you know, serious injury stuff, that's not a slap or a pinch. That's something more. And then also only school safety staff, people who are really trained in how to safely restrain these students, are allowed to use what we call mechanical restraints. So a mechanical restraint is something other than your body, whether that's a band or a tie down. I'm not an expert in restraints, but mechanical is pretty serious.
Okay. All right. And what about high school students? What changes were made that it would directly affect high school students?
You wouldn't want to leave high school students out, right?
No.
You got the little kids, you got the reading kids. So the biggest change in high school is actually, I think, really, really important for high schoolers and parents of high schoolers. And that's that schools are now required to make sure that students understand what we call acceleration options, all the ways that you can actually graduate from high school. So that includes career and professional academies, career courses, a career pathway, work-based learning. There are options with fewer credits. This is really, when you get to that age where you're like, why am I in high school? This is stupid. I have to figure out what to do with my life. I have nieces and nephews who are this age, and there's a lot of anxiety here. So this is going to be different in every district. But middle school students are supposed to learn about these options in their career planning course. Schools now have to have yearly career fairs. And it's not just the circle of tables saying, hey, you should join Future Farmers of America. They have to actually have a way for 11th and 12th graders to interview with potential employers, which is huge. They're supposed to make sure that high schoolers have access to at least one work-based learning opportunity. Some people call those apprenticeships or internships, but, a way to get a sense of what the world of work is like. And finally, and I think this is fantastic change, particularly for kids who do work, Bright Futures, which is the college scholarship program for kids, it's always required a certain number of volunteer hours. And volunteering is great, but you can't work and volunteer and go to school and sleep. So now kids who need to work can actually count those work hours in place of volunteer hours. And that's an important recognition that, we do have kids who earn incomes to support their families.
Okay. So last, did I hear about a change to student searches at schools?
Steph, I hope this never comes up with anybody who's watching this video, but we do know that students get searched at school. Maybe there's a suspicion of drug possession or alcohol, anything like that. So there's a sort of an interesting little twist now, and that's that any searches must be actually conducted discreetly. Think about if you're in the airport and they want to do a strip search, they don't do it in the middle of the terminal where everyone can see you, right? They actually take you behind a partition. So it's a little bit like that. They have to maintain the privacy of a student's personal items. And you remember being in high school, we all have personal items in our purses. And so if a search turns up items that are allowed, they have to be given back to the student right away. So, you don't just get to take the whole backpack and, say, well, you had one thing and so it's ours now. So that's, it's just kind of a nice recognition that, students are people and they do deserve the courtesy of having their belongings private to them.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you, Cheryl. And hopefully next year we will get the legislative updates to you a little bit earlier than December. But hey, at least we got it out there. So thank you.
It takes a long time to implement changes. So, and remember, school start times, you got 3 more years.
Darn.